The Backstage series was born to tell anecdotes of the behind the scenes, but also to celebrate some of the most important moments of the history of Alfa Romeo this year, as every year. Actually, there are many, many anniversaries to celebrate, and one of our favorites is the Alfetta GT anniversary. Alfetta GT, 50 years ago, exactly, it was mid-May, was presented to the audience and then was launched on the market and also on the racetrack with a great following. This car can be introduced in many different ways, and seeing the huge piles of documents that we still have available, we could devote a cycle of conferences to it, not only in one episode. So let's try to tell some pieces of this history, the origin, for example. Just few seconds of a video that tell a lot about the car, the pleasure of driving it, the style, the plant where it was born. And now I would like to invite on the stage today's guests, Fabio Madaro, who's a very experienced journalist who today collaborates with Young Classic and was here this morning to photograph one of the Alfetta GTs. Please join me on stage. Good afternoon, everybody. And now I would like to ask Raffaele Sacchi to join me on stage. Raffaele Sacchi is one of the fathers of a part of the Alfetta GT. He worked at the design of the bodywork when this car was born, so will tell us something that maybe we don't know. Hello, hello. Hello, everybody. My name is Raffaele Sacchi, and I had the pleasure of working on this model from 71 to 73. I worked on the internal part of this car. I was a young designer and I tried to give my best. Please take a seat. We will talk later about this part. And another guest can be presented through an excerpt of the movie which was shot at the time. Rally di Romagna, 1978. The Alfetta, driven by Pregliasco Resoli, is super fast and goes to Castrocaro Terme, winning the Italian title of the Gruppo 2. Mauro Pregliasco, so the sports aspects of this car. Welcome to the Alfa Romeo Museum. Well, you need no introductions, but I would like to ask you to welcome everybody here. It's a pleasure to see you come back here as a speaker. Well, good afternoon. I have many good memories. This car is my heart. I won the Assoluto cars of the Gruppo 2. It was not a winning car for that category. And I must say that I feel emotional because it reminds me of times when I was younger, but also of beautiful times, beautiful victories, results, competitions. And I also remember that in the beginning, the Alfa Romeo was quite shy. So it didn't use a red car, but a green car, then a light blue one, and then finally they saw the results and they gave me a red car. What can I say? Well, I'm very happy to be here. I came here many, many times. I feel home, and this once was the headquarters, and it was fantastic for everybody when we came here. Can I ask something since you're here? According to you, what was the strong point of this car, the real strong point? Well, this car had an incredible way of keeping the road. It had a De Dion bridge, the gear was at the back, rear wheel drive. So the engineer Marelli gave me the independence to develop it, so to speak, but it was standardized, so we couldn't do much. We worked on the tires from 13 to 15, on the suspensions. The brakes were excellent. We couldn't do much. If we want, the only defect was that it didn't have lots of horsepower, because it was produced in a crisis moment. Well, every pilot says so for every car. No, it's a reality. It should have deserved much more horsepower, and then with Turbo Delta we would get them. But the energy crisis, unfortunately, had this car been standardized with a large head motor with 2 valves, so it didn't have the engine of the GTA, which had 4 valves per cylinder and 230 horsepower. These had just 180, 185. Thank you. Please take a seat. You can start from the origins. We know very well the car. Many of you know it very well because you've seen almost 70 cars outside on our track. But apart from this, the origins are dated way back in the past. So the Alfetta derives almost without mechanical modifications from another model. What we talked about the Alfetta, but in another Backstage, and the Alfetta Coupe had the same history. Alfa Romeo would have liked to present jointly or after a short period together with the sedan. So in '74, we after 2 years from the sedan, the Alfetta GT was presented with all the communication that Alfa Romeo was able of. The quadrifoglio, the house organ, made publications about it. The usual press presentation was done with the part dedicated to the driving, and then press releases. And when it was launched on the international market, the car was awaited for. There is a folder of anticipations, expectations, so all the articles of the magazines that waited eagerly for the presentation of the car. And when the car arrived, but it had, of course, unusual shapes for the time, which at the time were welcomed, well, not immediately, maybe in a warm way, as it happened for most of the Alfa Romeo cars, and then little by little starts to get into the heart of fans. Fabio, what was the market of the coupes at the beginning of the 70s, like high-end coupes? Well, its competitor could be considered the BMW of the time. But this car arrived in a disruptive way, dividing the public because it had an unusual line. It's a coupe, but it's very comfortable. It's a real 2+2 with a real hood, and at the time it was not easy to find something like that. So in the beginning this created some of disorientation, but then it was one of the strong points. Maybe it's the best compliment you can make to a designer. So everybody knows that the aesthetic part is from Giugiaro. Well, the nicest compliment you can do to Giugiaro, if you ever needed it, is that this car is very current even today, and it is beautiful. So you rightly talk about the wheel of making it a big and comfortable car. So shortening the wheelbase is not so substantial in the Alfetta GP from the sedan to the coupe, and Alfa Romeo wanted to have a real two back seats, also deriving from the fact that the Alfa Romeo at the time was thinking of having a range of coupes which could be diversified. So if you had the possibility of watching the backstage of Montreal that you can also find in our YouTube channel, you can discover that in the same period, mid 60s, at least three different coupes cars were being developed. One was the Montreal, the second one was the Montrealina, a 1750 base, and then there was another coupe, a stronger one, nicknamed Testudo, which is also called a Giulia Spring Speciale Prototipo at the museum. So basically, it was a two-seater coupe, a 2+2, and a coupe with a more performing engine. And then we will get to the 8 cylinders. So when we started to have they started to have the idea of having a coupe version of the Alfetta, which is called 116B and C in the beginning. So even before giving it a code, they started to think about the coupe versions of the Alfetta, thinking there could be a double way. Well, they were thinking of a car that had to be bigger. It couldn't be a two-seater coupe or a 2+2, but it had to have a real comfort and room also for the back seats. All this is told, as usual, by the press releases. So in this case, we don't see the article of the press release, but the article on the quadrifoglio, which was copied and pasted from the press release, and which explains how a Gran Turismo was the base of the project. And some drawings are also anticipated, which was presented as preparatory drawings. Many of these would circulate on the press, among fans. In particular, many would use these drawings later on, because these drawings were the base of the project of the future Alfetta GT, but in a certain sense were still far from that car, because this car would gradually take its shape, but there was a real prototype which was created in the beginning, 1-to-1, a driving model, a real car, but that in Alfa Romeo was still catalogued as 105/68, so not yet as a 116, but as a 105/68, which was the genealogy of the Montreal, the Giulia series. What are instead the prototypes which are developed for the 116 SC, the coupe version of the Alfetta, have completely different origins. Some very classical, some very cutting edge. So the first, in order of time, that we find are these drawings signed by Nardiello, who was a pattern maker. So there are corresponding designs signed by Cattoni and other people from the design department that, starting from the beginning, were thinking of a disruptive shape. And they were thinking of solving the problem of the 4 seats with a fastback tail, not with the short tail of the Giulia Spring GT, but a single back volume, a voluminous one, which would go on the production cars as well. Even though all these drawings are very different one from the other, the idea is clear that the concept of having a more voluminous back should be something imposed by Alfa Romeo, or at least explored by the specifications, because not only the design department was involved, but also other external body work makers like Giugiaro, as we know, that in those years was becoming independent, and Bertone, as we will see shortly. Even though all these prototypes from Giugiaro were signed as SICA, so as if it were a project developed within the Alfa Sud or within the collaboration that Alfa Sud and Giugiaro had. So with this draft that is signed by Favilla, as you know, that should have been here, but unfortunately couldn't and be here with us today. So we're talking about 1968. So the first drawings are from 1966 for the 116C. So it's a car which is designed 4 or 5 years before production, but the Alfetta was already being developed, and there would be other reasons for this delay. But in the air, there was also an alternative that, as you see from these drafts, has a very different setting from the Alfetta GT, the final one, and that even though having the mark of the 116 had another origin problem. And if you have followed the backstage on the Scarabeo, probably you can identify the idea of deriving as coupe with a central transversal engine from that. So even though the architecture is not explained, at the back of the pictures of the prototypes, you can read 116C or 11621, which was the Scarabeo 2, with a transversal back engine. Well, central engine, not front engine. So in this case, the car would have 2 seats, would have been lighter and more sporty, and 2 models were built. If you see with attention, you see a mirror on the front, because the model was created just in half, and the mirror was used to look as if it was a complete car. But if the history of the Scarabeo 2 was already told, and we know that story, the conclusion, and the project would come to nothing, in the 68, again, 3 models, prototypes, coming from the design departments, Giugiaro and Bertone, started to arrive with 3 different approaches that, as we will see, will be mixed. So talk about models, as you can see here, we have a model which is just like a 3-door Alfetta in the German style, with a sedan body which is shortened and cut. The other model has a more compact shape and resembles more a coupe. But apart from this, very shortly, we get to a real prototype of the 116C. You see the grid, which recalls the 2000 the Veloce. The back is high with a fast back line, and as we can see from the other pictures, the shape is very different from the shape that the Alfetta GT would have finally, even though certain details are worthy of note, because we will see later on that the different offerings will and proposals will be mixed. We can see as the back part, the back glass is very similar to the final car. So one-to-one model was created of the car in clay and plastic. So it couldn't go on the road, of course. But we see it in a presentation, exhibition room, where there are also other cars presented, and the other cars are the proposals of the other of the design department and the others bodywork makers. So Giugiaro is the recognized father of the Alfetta GT. Let's make a step backwards and let's talk about the prototype of the car that had been studied in collaboration with Giugiaro, which had not yet created its company. And this project, the SICA project, starts to have similar shapes to the Alfetta GT, but also more compact details. It's like the Mangusta. So this model, this prototype, it's the first model which was ready in 1968 and from which a series of one-to-one models derived for the entire 1968 till June 1969, which take inspiration from already existing components, also pieces of Alfa Sud, other elements of the Alfa Sud spring. So this 116 Zika project starts to have more definite shapes. In this case, again, models are created, as we've seen, in a one-to-one scale. And then we get to the other prototype, the prototype from Bertone. Bertone presented a prototype that initially can look not very elegant. He presented it as Alfetta Coupé Giardinetta. It was a way to define this very high volume of the back part. But something very specific of the Bertone project is not the back, which is like a giardinetta. Even Bertone didn't bet on it probably, but it's the front, because if you turn it, you see that it starts to resemble very much to the Alfetta GT. The Alfetta GT, as it was presented in 1974, didn't was not born from a single project, but was born from the mix of different prototypes. So with a work which was carried out by the Centro Stile in collaboration with other bodywork makers, in collaboration with Giugiaro, of course, but which then found an original solution, taking inspiration, taking the good parts of the different proposals and collaborations. Of course, this is a general line, but then we have to take decisions. So apart from the general lines, you have to take final decisions about the details, and these decisions were many on many details. There's dozens of pictures only concerning the position of the lettering, for example, and dozens of pictures only concerning the shape of the crest. But there are certain elements for which there is a two-way decision, and these are summed up on a single prototype, which divided in half longitudinally becomes the prototype where two different positions are compared, one more conservative, another one more innovative, that we can see very easily here. For the front, the choice was between round lamps or square lamps, which started to appear in the market. And for the Alfetta 2000, the choice was the same. And for the Alfetta GT, the round lamps would be chosen as the previous car, underlining all the front part, and the square lamp, which was anticipated by the Giulia, was abandoned. The same is done for the back in this case. The photo is not very visible, but on one side we have vertical lamps, again abandoned, and on the other side we have the horizontal lamps, very similar to the ones that would be mounted on the Alfetta GT during production. So once decided for the round lamp, decisions had to be made, and Giugiaro during interviews said that Alfa Romeo at the last moment decided to change certain details. And what we see here is not the final version. So if the exterior part was challenging because Alfa Romeo wanted to make a coupe very comfortable but very forward looking, exploring different ways and mixing them. The interior parts were decided they are very peculiar for the Alfetta GT. So if on one side the 105 series is an inspiration, again the dashboard is completely redesigned. So I would leave the floor to you if you can tell me something about the origin of the idea. Well, basically, we were informed about the willingness of innovating. So innovation was making more visible the instruments, allowing the passenger or the pilots driving these cars on the races, on the racetracks, to allow better communication between pilot and co-pilot. So basically, we had to find a solution that could also visually make the instruments clearer. So we tried to make an effort to set all the dashboard in this way with all the instruments, the heating part, and we tried to use the space that was not excessive, so it was not easy, but as always, we made it. So, did you get the models from the design department, or there was a direct collaboration? Well, we always had a direct contact with the designers. Not only direct, but there was also a clash because the engineers and the designers, well, have always had conflicts because uh, they wanted the moon and we said no, it's not possible. But in the end, we always were able to find a good compromise to satisfy the needs, the stylistic needs that always made our model successful. In the case of the exteriors, the pictures are from March 1971. And when did you start working on the interiors? Well, we started working on the interiors in September, October 71, and I followed them up to 73. And when you started working, the only choice was the central dashboard, or there was an alternative? Well, it was already defined. So the internals, from the point of view of style, were defined already. Then, as I said, there was an interaction between us and them to find the good solutions and compromises, but the design was already decided. So merit goes to the designers. It's their merit if they were able to create this beauty. So we could say that it was just a project we engineered or the modifications continued. Now, as I said, basically there's always been a continuous dialogue between us and the designers till the last moment. There's not a specific beginning and a specific end. There was always, even during development, a collaboration. So basically, the lines were defined and the general lines and the details were defined little by little. And the Alfetta GT had as a characteristic the two comfortable seats. Well, the back, if I recall well, for example, the windows went up and down manually. It was not automatic. So the problem was finding a way of maneuvering comfortably the system on the left side. So a designer studied a round handle that with the right hand could be easily accessible by reducing also the friction that before was very strong. So they studied a system to move the windows in a specific and intelligent way. And also the back window was very big. Yes, yes. Especially the back part allows this car to have great visibility and a lot of light, plus a baggage compartment of a sedan. So it was a success at the time. No one had done something like that in those years.
Anche nel caso degli interni, i primi disegni, se
And
possibile,
the
sono
first
estremamente
designs
precedenti a quelli
come
iniziali.
even of the interiors
Prima in
come
questo
before the
caso,
design of the exterior.
alcuni
We see
addirittura
here a
specie
design of the
coupé, possiamo
160
dire,
coupe September
quindi
67.
molto prima dei
So
primi modelli che
a
abbiamo
lot
visto.
before the first models that appear.
Lavoravi ancora in progettazione
Were you still
quando
working in the planning when a few years after you decided to go back to the headquarters? Yes, but I was already moved on another model. So I sort of abandoned the coupe. So I followed this process only partly, not directly.
Grazie mille.
Well, thank you.
Come
Fabio.
hai visto, insomma, da giornalista che quindi ha una
So,
visione un po' più
as a
ampia
journalist, having a wider view
come la
and
nostra,
not
hai visto come in varie forme poi si sono
as
sviluppate
ours, you've seen how the final shape was the mix of several shapes, and also for the interiors,
si è cercato un
a
compromesso
compromise was chosen.
è stato ripensato. Insomma, che
But
periodo
what
era?
kind of period was it? So, how do you see the origin of this synthesis?
L'origine della
Well, the
sintesi
origin of the synthesis, well, I understood it very well thanks to what
vicino a me. Quello
our friend said. But the question that I have is why the second series, for example, goes back to a more traditional solution for a certain point. But probably he says, I was not there, so I don't know. Don't ask me. But do you know why they went from something interesting as the first configuration to something nice but completely normal? Well, actually, in the history of Alfa Romeo, this happens endless times. If we think about the Giulia Sprint GT, which was born, for example, with the rib on the hood and then it's flattened. If we think about the Alfetta or the Alfa 33 for the interiors, which was born with an innovative dashboard, and then it was made more conventional with the second series. So I believe that these were commercial choices. So the audience preferred to have a more mature car. So it was for the market, even though the Alfetta GT has a specific career, because as all the Alfa Romeo from the period was born 1800, and economy car was created in the 2000, and then finally also the 2500 arrived. So another career would have
partendo dalla 106
been the
2005,
evolution from the
abbozzata la 119,
GT6 2005, so the Alfa 9 GT, the coupe with the same shape but with the gear in front. Okay, thank you.
arriviamo a un certo punto che
So at a certain
processo
point, the production goes in production, is ready, and starts to be presented and launched.
È costruita ad Arese e collaudata
It's
sulle piste
built in
moderne
Arese
di Balocco.
and tested on the very modern tracks of Balocco. Then it goes all over the world,
Di tecnica e di stile.
bringing its tradition of technique and style. What makes of an Alfa Romeo an Alfa Romeo? Well, it talks about Arese, but also Balocco and test. Sebastiano, you were not in the initial list, but can you please join me on stage and witness your role of test pilot? So what makes an Alfa Romeo an Alfa Romeo?
Grazie. Ho male di pure se vuoi, Sì.
Buonasera a tutti.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and thanks to Lorenzo Ardizio for inviting me. Well, just to comment briefly this car, the project of the 116. The project of 116 is very complicated and difficult to develop. So Alpha technicians didn't fear bringing it forward. So we're talking about an engine in the front, differential gear at the back. So it's not easy, it's not cheap, and it was an expensive project for Alfa Romeo. But Busso, etc., were coming from the races, so they decided to create the Alfetta, like the 158 and 59, which won two world championships in 50 and 51. So the project went along. So I was hired in 1968 in Milan, and in 67 the first prototypes of the Alfetta already arrived. So imagine 5 years of work, day and night. We continued for a long time. There were problems, but technicians faced them with responsibility, with passion. So the Alfetta is different from all the other automobiles, because if we weigh this car, which is similar to the Alfetta Berlina, we have, apart from the distribution of the weights, 50% in the front and 50% in the back, every axle has the same weight. If it's 1,000 kilograms, we have 250 kilograms per axle, and it's not easy. That only Alfa Romeo could face, because the other brands abandoned this for the high cost, not only of construction of the prototype, because the more details you have, the more it is expensive. So it was a high cost. Just think about the Dion. For experts, the Dion has to be checked 100%. If one or two were not perfect, they had to throw them away. So think about the cost for the company, also the production phase. So both during experimentation and production, the costs were very, very high. But this went to the benefit of the owners of this car, because they bought a competition car which can be driven on the normal roads. So I followed the car from the beginning till the end. Only us know how much we worked on this 116 version. It was not easy. So to all the owners of these cars of Alfa Romeo, please take care of them and consider all the work that was done. It was incredible. So when you fix them, when you do the maintenance, follow the instructions and the manuals. And another thing that I wanted to say is that all the Alfa Romeo cars have a soul, just like the people who worked for Alfa Romeo. It was something that only those who work there understand. It was a lot of effort, a lot of work. So I wish you to own a lot of these cars. Please take care of them and keep them in Italy. Thank you.
Sicuramente poi arriveranno le domande dopo.
Well, later on we will have questions for sure. But you said something.
Guidare su strada, se guidare su strada la vettura
You said driving on a normal road competition cars. Well,
nelle gare.
there's people who really use this car in the competitions.
Insomma, a un certo
But
punto
I don't hear very well. It's my second youth. And also, that's the reason why I also wear glasses, sunglasses. So, Mauro Pregliasco, we were saying, when Alfa Romeo at one point had a new product, even though Alfa Romeo was coming from a legendary past, from GTA, GTAM, in the races, it realizes that the world is changing. So, races on the road are becoming as interesting or more interesting than the races on the racetracks. So they started a program to transform the Alfetta GT in a rally car. When did they contact you for the first time from Autodelta?
io corso la prima volta nel
Well, the first race I did was in 78, so at the end of 77, but it was by chance because I received a prize in Sicily, and Kitty, Engineer Kitty, was invited as well. Engineer Kitty, he was sitting next to me. He asked me, Jaska, would you race for Alfa Romeo? I said, "Oh, yes." And at the end of 77, I won the Italian championship with Lancia Stratos, but now I have nothing. I have no contracts. Then I heard nothing. But after 3 months of wait and also of worry, because I had no other news coming, the secretary of the engineer called me saying, Pregliasco, can you give me your agenda? The engineer would like to talk to you. I said, what agenda? I'm available tonight, tomorrow, whenever you want. And then they called me 3 days after, and the story started from there. So the reality of the answer is that at the end of April, because the first race was in Sicily, and in the first days of May, well, that's when I started my collaboration with Alfa Romeo. And what was ready? What was the development point of the car? Well, the GTV was not very developed because nobody had made races with it. But Mr. Kitty made me at ease and gave me the opportunity to go with the mechanics to do tests. So we went on the, of course, we closed the roads to the traffic, and also the circuit both here and in Balocco was used. So we really developed the car very well, even though we couldn't change completely the car because we had to follow the rules and the norms, but we fine-tuned it. We raised to the maximum its performances for the Italian Rally Championship. And did Alfa Romeo believe and bet in rallies in that period? No, not immediately. Then after my performances, you realize I was before the Lancia Stratos and the Fiat 131. Many times those cars were conceived for the races. So at that point, they started to believe in it. And I pushed more horsepower, more this. And in the end, at the end of the 79, the Alfetta Turbo Delta was created, having more horsepower. It had defects because it had to be evolved. The car was the same, but the engine had many more horsepower, but it was a carburetor turbo. So when you accelerated, it accelerated after a second. It was slow. And when you left the foot from the accelerator, it accelerated for one more second. That was terrible. So way before I had the luck of driving the Fulvia, so I got used to braking with my left foot, and this helped me a lot to maintain at high revs the engine. So it's like an anti-leg assist, but manually with your feet. Can we talk about the coupe? Yes, 1 second. I want to ask something to Fabio. So the same question.
Si credeva nei rally
Did Alfa believe in rallies? Well, Alfa Romeo
decidi quasi di ritirarsi
almost wanted to withdraw from the racetracks, from the Gran Turismo, and started shyly to participate in rallies. Well, the answer is yes and no. At that time there was Fiat, there was Lancia. So the fear, maybe I believe, to interpret correctly your question, is Alfa Romeo was worried going in that department with cars that were very, very strong, like Fiat and Lancia. Maybe that's a reason why initially they were hesitant. That's what I imagine. Yeah, yeah. Yes, because Alfa Romeo had a huge name, incredible name all around the world. They won with the forerunners of the Formula One. Fantastic cars. I also visited the museum and I saw some of those cars. So exposing yourself after winning everything was not so easy. As rightly you were saying with Lancia, which had been winning everywhere for 10 years, it was not easy. But they realized that the advertisement was very important because it was very close to the people. It was not advertisement made on TV like a fake commercial. It was a true advertisement because they sent the car on the roads. And being a second group, not a fourth group or an absolute car, well, the wins were very important. How was the team of the Autodelta? Well, we talked about that during the backstages, but heard from the pilots, it's different. But at Autodelta, everybody was very good, very passionate. I went along with everybody, but they were not used to rallies. So I remember I have many anecdotes. For example, someone said, it's 6 o'clock, we finished our work time, but they didn't know that for rallies there were no timings, no working hours, and they were flexible and they were super good. They were passionate people. They had it in their heart. People who are for Alfa had Alfa in their heart. It was not for the money. They loved the cars. So I have an excerpt of an interview that you did at the time for Alfa Romeo. So let's watch it. Let's see the comparison between yesterday and today. Mauro. Who is Mauro Pregliasco? Well, who is Mauro? He's a simple man, an ordinary man, who is a pilot by profession, but is a man. And Pregliasco's car today it's something unique. And my Alfetta now is giving me a lot of satisfaction and rewards because it never breaks. Even in the strongest rallies, get to the final line, the finish line, so I'm very happy about it. The Alfetta reached a huge reliability. The only thing that we still have to improve, I think, is the engine, the power of the engine. The turbo is arriving, so I hope, and we all hope, And all the fans of Alfa hope that this engine will be powerful to fight against the other cars of the Gruppo Quattro. So we are in the fourth group. We are running in the group 2, and we are always winners. Well, I had so many satisfactions with Alfa Romeo. Unfortunately, with the Turbo Delta, we only raced in the 80. In 1980, it was brand new. It had several problems to fine tune, but I won in Romania, for example, a rally. It was the only competition that we won with that car. It was the last year when Alfa Romeo had to present a new Turbo Delta with more horsepower, less delay in acceleration. And unfortunately, instead, it was a cold shower. The announcement was done that Alfa Romeo was abandoning the rallies. It was terrible. They paid us in 81 as well, due to the contracts. And just Sanesi tried the Alfetta GTV. He came on the circuit with me. But this proves that they really believed in it, but unfortunately, in that moment, maybe to close the Autodelta that they couldn't manage as they wanted because engineer Kitty, who was a genius, very good, was not an easy man. So they gave him inputs and then he decided according to his will. Even though personally he loved more Formula One than rallies, he did the rallies because he was told to do so. Which, when he reached his goal of the Formula One, the other activities are put aside. So at the time, when he started to let the 33 grow, well, he wrote a note to Luraghi explaining how everything that Autodelta was doing will bring results, but in the end, the goal is to get to the Formula One. That had already been his dream, and when he could do that, the rest was put aside. That's very true, but I would like to underline something. Look at this car. So I don't want, of course, I drove it, I loved it, but it is beautiful today. It is modern. It's as if it were drawn now. You see many cars on the streets which are old. This one looks like it's been drawn today. It's beautiful. Congratulations. I've always loved it a lot. Then, of course, I'm not objective because I loved it and I drove it. Thank you. And you rightly say, looks like as if it were drawn today, it's still beautiful. But things that the fans have always said, of course, but the Alfetta GT gets in the collector's world late, shadowed by the GT105 for many years, but today, as we've seen outside the museum, it can create a lot of enthusiasm. So as a journalist working today, again, on the collector's world, can you tell us something about the Alfetta? Well, it is so beautiful that it is discovered every year. So every year it increases. What are its competitors today? I don't know. Like, it's again BMW. There's BMWs from the past which are very nice, but not because I'm here in Arese now, but I don't have the fascination of this Alfetta. It's a different class, the Alfetta GT, yes. BMW at those times at nothing. Now it's been improved, but it couldn't be compared at the time. Well, then BMW did a lot of improvements, but you are the ones now who have to push this car because the car is loved by fans and people who know it love it more and more. As I said, it's very current, it's beautiful, it dominates. So we see it here, and we will have other backstage devoted to it because its career was very long. And you said that you have some anecdotes on the coupe. You, to- you told me once about the Alfetta's van. Well, I have some anecdotes, of course. For example, the 1800 prototype. The first prototype, well, this car camouflage, usually prototypes are put together with certain parts and different configurations. So the first prototype had a 1800 engine with 130 horsepower. So we did Milano, Torino, Aosta, and back to see how the engine and the transmission were performing, and we were driving it night and day in Balocco or on the highway. So I was driving to Aosta. Well, this car was faster than 200 kilometers per hour. It was 75 as a prototype. So I overpassed many cars at a very high speed, and there are turns. But with this car, well, we have a pilot here, so we can do a lot of things with this car if you can drive it. So I stopped at the Auto Grill of Châtillon for a coffee. It was early morning. A French man stopped with a Citroën, and I overpassed him. The car was camouflaged like a van, you see, as if it transported fruits or vegetables. So this Frenchman stopped and said, "I've never seen a van going so fast." And I said, "Well, there are no vans like this so fast. But what are you bringing? Goods, perishable goods?" And I said, "Yes, I got fish. I have to bring fish to restaurant of the casino." And he said, "I've never seen a van running so fast." And I said, "Well, it goes very fast because you have to bring fresh fish to the restaurants. Otherwise, you've got complaints." So that, that he didn't know what it was really. So he was not very convinced. Then I wanted to say that the 116 version, well, for that we have to thank Satta, Musso, and all those who wanted it, who made a present to the owners because they bought a good product at a good price, despite the other cars, who are expensive but with less contents, because the other builders they came here to Arese or to Balocca, they saw this car and said, "You are crazy producing such a car. With this car we produce 3 cars, but Alfa only produced 1. We have a pilot here who knows more than me, so he knows what it means to have a De Dion, the back gear. So it's an exceptional car. It's a racing car that we can all use every day. So we have to take care of it. Thank you."
In questo periodo,
So in this period, Alfa Romeo was also pushing a lot the Alfetta GT in Italy and in Europe, advertising it, but it was also the period when Alfa Romeo was trying to go in a more organized way back to the United States. So the Alfetta GT becomes the promotion tool. So seeing the success, commercial success of the cars, the potential and the first results at the races, at one point the Alfa Romeo, based in Newark, that sold to the 50 American states, asked the Italian Alfa Romeo to do a communication campaign for the American sports clients. We see a detail of Sports Car magazine where basically they address the American market the Californian Championship, specifically the SCCA, where many cars deriving from the serial cars derive, thinking to create a racing package for the championship starting from the Alfetta GT. They thought doing like they did with the Giulietta Spider or like other manufacturers did by building entire new careers in the races. But it is true that there were very few pilots who would buy this package and use it to race, but at one point, well, this was the communication. An invite arrived at Alfa Romeo that with today's eyes could have been a huge communication campaign, but that at the time was not considered, it was neglected because through De Laurentiis, Alfa Romeo received the request of Paul Newman, who wanted an Alfetta GT to race at the California Championship. At the time, Paul Newman was already famous. Alfa Romeo was a rigorous and serious company. So
con tutto quanto arriva comunque in mano, questo viene
this request
dalla direzione vendita estero che lo passa a Session Radio, quindi alle relazioni pubbliche, e quando
came in the hands of public relations. And the first note, what does it mean to race for Alpha? It means that he pays or we have to pay. So racing for Alpha means what? So the dialogue starts at that point. At the first point of dialogue is the American Alfa Romeo says to Autodelta, we were requested to have a car. Paul Newman would be interested. We are in good contacts with him, but he has some requests. So Kitty answers. So on the second page, there's a signature of Kitty. So Kitty responds himself saying, what we can do is giving him a car, 4 valves, those horsepower, according to the specifications, the rules, these performances, etc. And this is the cost. There's also a note, maybe we will have to put weights because the American regulation needs a higher weight. But anyway, this letter is copied through De Laurentiis to Paul Newman, and the dialogue starts. So every time the dialogue comes from America, it talks about technical reasons, and in the Italians talk about financial reasons. But basically, the big issue is Paul Newman says, I need a car with at least 230 horsepower, but in the Californian Championship, there are certain specifications, cylinders, and Alfa Romeo says it can be a problem because with the old cylinders of the GTM, 2 valves per cylinder, we could get to those power, but the new ones are no longer valid. So with the ones for the Alfetta GT, we get to 180 horsepower. So there's a problem. So the communication goes on, and at one point they agree that they can reach 200 horsepower, whereas Paul Newman says it's okay, but the car is not for free. The cost is 9.5 million liras. It was not something a huge excessive, but it was the normal cost and market cost of a Gruppo 2 car. So the communication goes on, and Paul Newman starts saying, I like to race with it, but only if the car is sent me for free, and only if it is officially prepared by Autodelta. So the notes again appear, and Autodelta and Alfa Romeo didn't want to lose a chance. So they asked the communication department, okay, for free, oh, but what does it mean? Can we have returns in terms of advertisement? So Paul Newman is also invited to drive one, and he was very smart, and he said, well, the car is not performing enough, it's not fast enough, but if you get it, if I can get it for free, I will race with it. So unfortunately, Alfa Romeo didn't decide to give it for free. They say it's not worth it, the cost is not worth it. So they missed the occasion, having Paul Newman as an official pilot of the brand. Well, of course, Pregliasco, you were a great pilot anyway, but this was a little anecdote linked to the world of the Alfetta GT and races. I'd like to thank our speakers who made this conference very rich. Thanks Mauro, Fabio, and Raffaele for participating. And especially, I would like to thank you.